Hi guys, and welcome back to my channel. My name is Susan Nethercutt. I am a long-time professional artist and of late a master's student in visual art. In today's video, I'm going to be working on this painting that you can see. I've projected the photograph onto the canvas that I'm going to be painting on. And this is part of a series of works that I've been making for the past 9 months or so that relate to some trees that I connected with in Tasmania when I was on an artist residency earlier in the year. So I wanted to really capture in detail the process that I go through with this painting, because even though I've been a professional for a long time with a fairly known and popular style of bright abstract floral art, what my master's is all about for me is pushing the edges of my practice and really giving myself the space to investigate new approaches to the way that I want to approach nature. I've been making research-based work for my master's, which has been a new approach for me also, and really deepened the process in beautiful ways. So I thought it might be good to just have a really lovely, slow painting video today where I'm going to talk you through all the things that I'm doing as I approach this painting and continue to experiment with ways of making oil paintings that are fairly new and experimental for me, and hopefully you will get something out of the process as well. So what you've just seen me doing there is starting the process of tracing out just where the main areas are in this painting with a piece of white charcoal. And what I did just then was change my mind. And this is something that I do a lot lately. I have really stopped making art in a way that I am familiar with and have really been questioning what materials I use and if I can do things in a different way, using a different approach that's going to give me a better result. So the decision I made in that moment was, rather than doing something that I'd done before, which is just getting the basic composition traced out with a piece of white charcoal and then going in with the painting, I decided that I would actually do the underpainting in the Neocolor II water-soluble wax pastels. But before I did it on this larger painting, I wanted to really make sure that I was very clear on how that medium interacts with oil paint. And that is something that I have done quite a bit of research on over the last few months, because I have been working with these pastels and oil a bit with these small paintings such as this one you can see here, which are smaller studies of these bark paintings that I have been making. So one of the things that I have learnt in my inquiries is that oil paint and the Neocolor IIs don't really play well together. They play very well with acrylic paint, and I've used them for many years in relation to acrylic paint. They're super fun for all kinds of play, especially with abstract style works and expressionistic style works. But they don't play particularly well with oil paint, and you do need to be careful about making sure that you layer them correctly so that you won't have paint flaking off down the track. So what I learned in my research basically is that you need to seal the wax pastel layer before you go in with the oil. So what you can see me doing here is using a little bit of clear gesso. I'm just using the Liquitex brand, not sponsored, that's just the one that I use. And I'm dragging that over the surface of my pastel drawing. Now, one of the things that happens when you put any kind of wet media onto the wax pastels, the Neocolor IIs that is, because the Neocolor ones don't do this, is because they emulsify basically, and the colours move around and you get this really beautiful streaked effect, which I actually have been deliberately wanting to achieve in these paintings. And And if you go back a little while in my feed, you'll see me working on some of these paintings and how I emulsify using a wet wipe to get the streaked effect that I'm after. So sealing these first layers of these studies with the clear gesso actually just enhances the texture that I'm after anyway. So I wanted to experiment and make sure I've got my technique right before I do it on this really big canvas that I have ready to go. I was rather attached to these studies, particularly this one that I'm working on now that you can see here. I love the lightness and the washy, watercolory almost effect of the wax pastel on the linen, and I absolutely adore this painting. So it's taken me a while to build up the courage to make this change and to push forward and push the boundaries of what I know in my practice and see what happens when I add a oil layer to this. So this is the first step, adding the clear gesso over the top so that I've got a ground that I can paint on with the oils. The change that I made in my approach to starting this painting was that as I was going through the process of just tracing out those basic shapes and composition, I really like to use a projector for this because it just speeds up the process a lot and keeps things moving along a bit quicker in the studio. But I decided this time, rather than tracing lines and working with white charcoal as I've done a lot in the past, that I'd actually just go straight in with the Neocolor IIs and start to make those early marks with those and emulsify them onto the canvas and create a full underpainting in that way. Not dissimilar to how I had done in the smaller paintings that you can see on my table there. But I hadn't really done it to this scale before, and I hadn't done it in relation to using the projector. So it was a bit of an experimental process of figuring out how to do this. You can see me here, I've got my wet wipe and I have created my first marks, and I'm just going in and emulsifying the pastels with that wet wipe to get a bigger area of pigment. Those of you that saw my last video where I was doing a bit of prep in the studio, you'll have seen me painting the canvas that I'm working on, which is not actually a linen support. It is a canvas that I have painted the colour of linen with coloured gesso. And I've had many chats about my choices and reasons as to why I've done this that you can hear about in some of my previous videos. But you can see me here just working away on those areas, starting to get some of those colours in. I'm constantly moving backwards and forwards, working with my study that I have there that is the same sample of bark actually, the one that I chose to do this really large work with, making sure that I'm getting the colours and the marks in the right place. It's always a bit of back and forth with the wax pastels to make sure that I've got the right colours, and they have a great selection actually of really beautiful colours that work beautifully for my bark works, but I'm always just needing to test and make sure I've got the right ones before I go in. My projector, which is an Epson, it's a pretty old one. I'm not sure what the model number is, but it's been a good machine that I've had for many years. It's got this function where you can close the cover over the projection and it doesn't fully shut down, but it kind of goes into a low power mode. So I found that I was constantly flicking backwards and forwards between having the projection on and off and just gradually working up those layers and making sure that I wasn't just working with the projection. This was one of the reasons why I wanted to have that painting right next to me as I was working. When I made that study of the same bark sample, that wasn't from any kind of projection. I was just looking at the photograph and working freehand from it. So I really like to have those works near me when I am working so that I am not too locked into the photograph itself, but I'm actually really thinking about the painterliness of my marks and where I'm heading in the overall work. At this stage, I also realised that I wanted to have some really good quality photographic prints of the photo that I was working from. When you're working with a projection, particularly in my studio where I have a lot of light, you don't really get true colours, so I really wanted to make sure that I had some high quality photos that I printed on my Eucalypt printer, which you can see here, so that I could really make sure that I was able to see all the beautiful colours that are in this bark specimen. One of the beautiful things that I have really noticed about bark and working with these close-up photographs is how many colours are actually in those specimens, and that was one of the things that I really wanted to make sure I captured in the way that I layered this painting. So it was great just to print out a couple of photographs on a high quality printer so that I can make sure I capture all of the gorgeous colours and tones. One of the things that I have noticed of late in my painting practice is that it's really, really important for me to know when to step away from a photograph. So I was a little reluctant actually to work with a projection with making this painting, because I had noticed a few of the paintings that I've made recently that were really successful were ones where I stepped away from the photograph at the right time. And this is a dance that I think you can only learn through experience, and it's something that I'm still learning as I kind of am in the early stages, I suppose, in my career of working a lot with photographs and realistic imagery in my work. And so I've been really learning that hard lesson of when to pay attention to the photograph and how to draw out the really relevant information from that photograph in terms of colour and composition, but then also when to put it away and make sure that you are making the painting that wants to come and you're allowing the painting to help you to figure out where it wants to go. So you can see me here, I am working with that photograph, making sure I'm getting those lines really right and the colour blending really right. At this stage, it's all about the blending of the tones and getting that really gorgeous rusty and a yellow ochre coloured areas of the kino dripping down the surface of the eucalypt tree. I found working with the wax pastels on this huge canvas really, really great. They were so good for capturing the detail in the line work that actually is in the texture of the bark. They were excellent for that, but then the speed with which I was able to cover the canvas with really large areas of colour quite swiftly, but with a beautiful streaky texture that really works with the bark, was so good. So I highly recommend these as a way of creating underpainting. Once I had sort of that first layer of underpainting done in the wax pastel, I started to move in with some of the clear gesso to start sealing it for future layers with the oil paint. When I'm applying the clear gesso over the wax pastel, I'm really careful to do it in sections by colour, because it does spread and streak so much that it will carry colours over in the gesso to another area of the painting if you're not careful. I also found it really helpful to work in stages. There were some areas, such as these really deep, dark kino areas, that I wanted to get quite a dark layer in of. So I was kind of backwards and forwards with the clear gesso as I was working in sections, just to make sure I had everything the way I wanted it to be before I went in and sealed it. Also, because the clear gesso is going to leave a little bit of texture on the surface of the painting, I really tried to work with the lines that were already in the direction of the bark. So I was pretty happy with how this first layer turned out. I really love the marks that the wax pastels make and the effect of how they streak when you use the clear gesso in them as well. And I just really love the line work. It's a beautiful starting point for the painting, and it gives me a lot to work with before I go in with the oil layer, which is going to bring me in a whole new way of making texture and really bringing out a lot of the colour in the places where I want it to be. But the subtle mark making in the lines, I was really happy with how they worked out. So once that layer was complete, it was time to shift gears and put my projector away. And I wanted to just clear a little bit of space, not just physically, but also mentally. I wanted to really reflect on what I'm trying to achieve with this painting and why it is significant in the body of work that I'm making for my masters. So I packed up my work table and started to get things a little bit prepared for my oil painting stage. You can see me just popping out my Cobra water mixable oils there. And I got out my notebook and did a little bit of reflecting on some of the research that I've been doing behind this painting, which has been quite a lot actually. I have spoken a lot in previous videos about my work with trees, so if you want to learn more about that, you might want to go back a bit further in my feed to find some of those videos. But it all started off with the residency that I did in Tasmania. So if you want to learn more about the story of the trees, you can go and see those. But basically, this painting, which is an enlarged version of one of the first studies that I made of the bark of a tree that I connected with in Tasmania, it has two areas of kino, which are the viscous sort of wound areas in the wood that have been created by some kind of trauma to the tree. And that trauma can be a variety of causes. It can be some kind of an infection. Sometimes it's caused by actual physical damage of the tree. But the kino it produces, which is that sap that comes out of the wound, and I'm sure we've all seen that on different trees over time, it not only is an expression of wounding, but it's also the element that aids in the healing process. And I just found that whole idea so beautiful and so evocative, and also one that really relates to a lot of the tension that I feel in the landscape in Australia and a lot of the research, the historical research I've been doing for my masters, because I'm looking a lot at colonialism in Australia and a 19th century female artist who worked at that time. And this was a time when there was a lot of damage done to the Australian landscape and its trees. So it was really important to me to keep on checking in with what I'm trying to inquire into and express with this painting. So before I proceeded on to the next layer of oils on the large painting, I wanted to go back in again to this painting here, which is the original study that you saw me putting the clear gesso on earlier, and go in there with the oils first to just make sure that my approach is going to work and get a feel for how the oils are going to interact with the pastels underneath. Now, it's not something that I haven't done before. I have done previous canvases using this method, but this is the first time that I had used the layer of the clear gesso in between. So just wanted to make sure that I was really clear on my approach and that I'm really happy with the direction that it's moving in. Because as I mentioned earlier, I wasn't sure for the longest time if I actually even wanted to use the oil paint over the top. I was so enamored with the softness of the wax pastel. So this was really important for me to do and just make sure that the approach that I'm taking really fits with the vision that I have for this painting and what I want it to express. And so I also went in and put in a layer on this other bark study that I had also started earlier. Working with the wax pastels and the oils is taking me many months to figure out. One of the more frustrating elements of doing a master's is that I'm constantly having to put artwork aside to do some really deep thinking and writing. So the process of making the work gets very drawn out, and there's often really big gaps in between different parts of the work that I'm doing. And one of those is this decision I've been making for a very long time as to if I was going to go this next layer of oils with this group of works that I'm working on. So even though it can be a little bit frustrating to be slowed down in that process of making those decisions, I think overall it's actually been really, really good for me because it makes me really think about the material choices I'm making and why I'm choosing the mediums I am for expressing the ideas that I'm having. So overall, it's been a positive thing, but I am used to working very quickly, so I do find being slowed down a little bit uncomfortable. Okay, you can see me here starting to lay out some of my paints on my glass palette that I have on the trolley that I can wheel around my studio. As I mentioned, I've been using the Cobra water-based oil paints since about a year ago, and it's taken me a while to figure them out, but I have been really enjoying them. And you can just see me here, I'm mixing up a 50-50 of the painting medium that they make and also some water. I've just found that to be kind of the perfect consistency for me with painting. And not forgetting to write it on my container so that I can remember what is what. For this stage of the painting, I'm going to go back to working with the photograph, and I also have it up on my iPad as well as having the photographic print. And that's really just so that I can really zoom in and see the textures in the bark. But I'm also going to be keeping very much front of mind to be not too reliant on the photographs in this stage of the painting and to really start letting the painting tell me what it wants to be. I absolutely love working with oil paint. I find it so sensual and smooth. I love how it glides over the canvas. And I love how it also blends with the nature of the wax pastels once they have also been emulsified. Because there's so much beautiful texture and colour already in my underpainting, I'm doing a lot of glazing in the oil layer over the top. Some areas I'm using more viscous paint than others, particularly around these areas of Kino in the bark where the sap is dripping out and it's really quite glossy and viscous. I'm using a lot more paint, and that'll be an area where I really want to build up a lot of texture and also some really glazed areas so that it captures the actual texture of what the Kino is like. So I spent quite a lot of time on these areas of the painting, which I really do want to be very much the focal point of the painting because they are so central to the themes that I'm exploring with it. So you can see I've really built up those layers already, and now I'm going in for that second Kino wound, making sure that I'm really capturing the deep, reddy, rusty colours that are underneath those dark areas of paint. This was where having the iPad was so helpful because I'm able to really zoom in and see where the darks and the lights are and the reflections are so that I can make sure that I get this first layer in the oils right. And then in a lot of the white areas, I'm also using quite a lot of oil paint, and it's quite opaque because those areas are very white. One of the things that I'm really wanting to capture in this painting is the sense of texture in bark, and particularly the bark that you find on Australian eucalypts. It's so crunchy and it's often sort of peeling away and coming off the tree. It's such an iconic part of the Australian bush, walking through it and hearing the crunching of the bark that's come off the tree under your feet. It's really quite different to walking in other forests in other parts of the world that have a lot more rain and are greener and spongier. And I'm really wanting to capture that sense of texture that you get in the Australian bush through these bark paintings. This area up on the right hand side actually gave me quite a bit of trouble as I was working on it, and I did end up changing it at the end quite significantly because it just wasn't giving me the same shape that I had in my other painting that I'd created, the smaller study. So after a bit of contemplation, I decided that I was going to need to change it so that it looked actually a lot more like the painting that I'd made as the study. Which is a perfect example of why sometimes you need to step away from the photograph, and what the value in doing studies in the first place is that I think your eye and your hand fortuitously make different decisions that are better decisions than what you find in a photograph. So yet another piece of evidence for why you want to make preparatory work and make studies. Again, I just wanted to have a really good think about this painting in between layers. So I got out my journal again and did a little bit more reflecting and wanting to really capture what I'm learning in the process of painting this painting. I've been trying to really make sure that I am using my journal that is all about my painting process. I talked about this a few videos back as well, and I also made a whole video about my research journals and how I use them and how I've created different ones for different aspects of my practice. You can see I've come in the next day and I have stored away my brushes just on some wet wipes with a bit of Glad wrap over the top to keep them wet so that I didn't have to wash all of my brushes overnight. And I have to say that this is hands down one of my favourite things about painting with oils, is not having to do a huge brush up every time you paint. So the next day I'm getting in there and I'm really wanting to really make those colors sing in the bark, and the way that those beautiful rusty and deep yellow ochre tones blend with each other, getting in some of the darker tones and areas. And then really going in over those areas of Kino with quite thick viscous paint, because I'm really wanting to build up the viscosity of how those areas actually are in real life. And I'd still have a way to go in building that up in this painting. You may be disappointed to learn that I didn't actually complete this painting in time for this video. I do have another layer that I want to add with a impasto medium, because there's some really three-dimensional areas on the bark that I really want to capture. So I had to wait for that to arrive. So I'll be sure to keep you in the loop about where this painting ends up, and no doubt you'll see me adding in that layer of impasto paint. But I'm very pleased with where it is at the moment, and I feel like I'm well on my way, and there's not a lot to do to bring this canvas to completion. What I'm really happy about is all the beautiful, delicious texture and all the beautiful variances in colour and line that have come through, because I use that Neocolor II pastel underlayer and then those glazes of oil over the top. I just love the effect, and I'm really glad that I listened to my instincts about using the Neocolor IIs as the underpainting and then the layer of the clear gesso with oil over the top. I really look forward to painting more paintings in that way. So you'll have to let me know your thoughts on where this painting has developed to. I'd be really interested to hear in the comments if you have ideas for what could work in terms of mediums, or what you have experienced, breakthroughs you've had in the materials you use in your own practice that have been really exciting for you. I'd love to hear about it. I love sharing information with other artists. And look, if you've stayed until the end, can you please give me a paintbrush emoji, because this has been very much a painting video today. Don't forget to like and subscribe to my channel, and I'll catch you next time. Bye.